Yes. I will briefly make an introduction on what we did these 2 days, and then the groups will present their stories. So our purpose was to have a hands-on experience on how we can make stories for particular visitor personas in a museum. For me it was important, instead of just present to the participants how they can create such stories, to try themselves and explore this concept of storytelling in the museum. We were 8 people divided in 2 groups, and each one focused on one visitor persona who would visit Schloss Moyland. So our personas are firstly Christoph Brandt. They both work for the same IT company, and they are here in Kliv for a business meeting. So they have a few hours and decide to visit the museum. Christoph is not so interested in art. He prefers to explore a city instead of going to museums. Whereas Natalie really likes art. She knows a lot. She knows Beuys, has seen his works in other museums. So they are very different on what they want from the museum. I won't say a lot about the personas because the groups also will talk about that. The groups were given some example exhibits to work on. They could decide what they thought would be more interesting for its persona. We focused mainly on the story itself. We didn't work a lot inside the museum, but the groups worked also a lot with the material to present to the visitor. So the first day they were given the cards to work on, the exhibit descriptions and photos. They selected the information to use for each persona and discussed the concept for each story. And at the end of the day, we had a discussion on what each group decided for its persona and commenting between the groups. So the second day, the groups finalized the concept, designed the storyboard, and started to work on productions for each story, animations, photos, and audio. And some limitations that I feel that we had is that we had no Beuys expert in any of the groups. So the participants had to think a lot on which exhibits to use to find information content. Normally, if we had an expert on that, it would go a little bit more quickly. And I thought that initially that it would save time not to go and see the exhibition and where the exhibits are placed in the museum. But I feel this was not, I think this was a limitation. I think we should have started from the museum. So a little bit about what the first group did. In their opinion, Natalie pre-curates her visit, so they prefer the non-linear approach. She has limited time in general, so she is not so much interested in what let's say, the device itself and the digital part of the experience. She would like to experience the museum. And she would a little bit prefer unconventional information, not the usual information provided to all the visitors. For the experience, the group focused on the atmosphere and feeling more than a story plot. And they discussed a lot the post-experience, what the visitor could take away with her, and a little bit of gamification in the concept of having an exhibit checklist, and Natalie can check what she has visited, or maybe revisit the museum to see the rest. So a little more about this post-experience concept. It is something we have investigated in the past as well. We have not really implemented anything on it, but we feel it is important. Most visitors want to take something away from a visit, and in most cases, because they are not allowed to make photos in the museum and not really do much in the museum, this is a little bit frustrating. So if we work a little bit on the concept of a digital object for the visitor to take back home, we can imagine a lot of things. I won't say more because the group on Natalie has more to say about that. So on the other persona, which is not interested at all in art and this particular museum, and an approach a little bit to make it more entertaining and more engaging was taken. So there is a more pronounced use of technology here. An issue that we discussed for both groups was indoor localization. It is something I didn't mention yesterday, but the technology is there so that you can know exactly where the placement, where is the exhibit and where is the visitor in relation to this exhibit. So in this case, you can have the, is it okay? Yeah. So you can have the exhibit itself somehow.
You have to step away a bit with the mic from
Okay. The exhibit itself somehow calls the visitor to present the related material. Without the mic?
I have this one.
Okay.
I don't know, it has to do something with the laptop and the mic, I guess. But
If I here, is it okay? Okay. Okay. So just to sum up, also about what we were discussing yesterday, in my opinion, one of the main things we should take into account is that we need to start getting to know the visitor. Each museum should try to work on visitor studies, getting to know what their visitor, who they are and what they need. Visitors sometimes would like to curate their individual experience, and the personas are a very good design tool to do that. Again, what was mentioned during the workshop is that a particular exhibition has a specific objective, and the whole story of the particular exhibition is important, not just show the visitors isolated exhibits. But this is again a point for the museum to take into account when providing to the visitors such mobile experiences. It is important to provide short narrative pieces in general, not make the visitor bored, keep the visitor moving in space, try to create a coherent experience and provide choices and interaction. As we mentioned, some visitors would like material before the visit to help them plan, and again, some material after the visit so that they can take something away with them. And participation and creativity is very important. The previous talk, I think, was very strong about that, the Beuys table and so on. And finally, as we already mentioned, it should be a social experience because very few people visit the museum alone. And if they can really make it, make something together with their friends or family, it makes the experience stronger. So just to finish, there are several simple online authoring tools that can be used for to create the simple storytelling experiences. I just have some examples here, but there are, I think, much more if someone would like and is interested to experiment. And I think the technology is there for museums to do simple and cheap, let's say, solutions like that. And I think it's time we experiment with this kind of applications for the visitor, because we have to see if they work or not, and how we can make them a part of the visit and improve the visit in any type of museum, either archaeology, art, or whatever. So I wouldn't like to talk more. I will give the chance to the groups to present what they have created. First, we have the group on Christophe, the less interested guy. Yeah, so one idea that was discussed, and I will present it because they made me present it, is the hologram idea. So since this guy is not so interested, you need really some kind of technological thing to probably attract his attention. So the idea of having holograms to do that was suggested. This technology exists, is not yet very, let's say, very widely used, but it's an interesting approach. So the idea is to use the space that is in this closed, let's say, yard in front of Moyland to have some color-coded holograms related to different performances of Beuys, the different faces of Beuys. And this can relate to different parts of the exhibition. For example, this one can relate to, to an exhibition on the biography of Beuys, and this to this specific performance. We didn't really discuss how this could be incorporated to the second experience that the group will present. But I think it's an interesting approach. Okay, so.
Hello. Yeah, we looked at Christophe as well, the guy who is here by coincidence and doesn't really care much about art, but we would still like to engage him in what we have to show here. So when we started looking at him, it was quite difficult. First of all, because we want to do something with storytelling, and as Ido showed on the first day, with storytelling you very often have a story structure. So you have a beginning, there's an incident, something happens, they go on an adventure, there's a climax, and then it ends. Which makes a lot of sense when you go, for example, to the Greek mythology, because there are actually stories there that you can tell. But when you go to more modern artworks, then that story within the artwork becomes very difficult, because it's open for interpretation. The artist did not leave a note saying exactly what his sled with fat and filth on it meant. So instead of looking at the mythology of the artwork, we looked at the artist mythology. So the story around the person, bring that to the visitor, and help him to understand what he's actually looking at, because just a sleigh with felt and fat and a torch, if I see that for the first time, I would not necessarily put that in a museum. So we took that actual story and we made a it has become a video, but when we can fully work with a tablet, it is something that you would walk around with. You would get, it's part of a larger tour, so it's not just this particular artwork, but it really tells the story of the artist, and this, I think, would be like the second step or the third step. So the visitor arrives at this particular artwork and this starts playing. To show what we've come up with, we made a video. It's there we hinted towards some animations, but within 3 hours we couldn't make any animations, so we did it with some zooming effects, so you can at least get the idea. And it's not completely, yeah, well, I'm quite happy with 3 hours of work, to be fair. So if, just play it, yeah. So they fly out. You see?
In World War II, Joseph Beuys volunteered for the German Air Force. On the 16th of March 1944, his plane was shot down on the Crimean front. Tatar tribesmen found him and transported him with a sled to their tent. A torch served for navigation and orientation. The Tatars wrapped his broken body in animal fat. They covered him with a felt blanket to keep him warm. Now, we don't know whether this story is a myth or not, but it is obvious that felt and fat became materials that Beuys often used in his artistic career.
Then blinks like the next thing you should go to. So the idea is to kind of introduce the artist, introduce the works, and show the story he invented or not, why he uses these kinds of materials. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Something and for the discussion I get it back.
It's not showing up. Okay. Okay. Wait, why didn't it work? Go on. All right. What? Little technical difficulties. Does anybody know how to mirror this? Arrangement? Yeah. Ah, thank you very much. Okay, good. All right, so we're digital boys. Okay. So for us, we were given a task to design a persona-centric digital narrative museum experience for a persona. The persona we received is Natalie Schmidt, and like most people, she's a very complex person, and we don't want to go too much into her, so we extrapolated some basic attributes, needs, and anticipated her visit based on her persona. We figured that she's a cultured person, she's well-traveled, she prefers a non-linear experience, and she is device competent. That means she owns a cell phone and she knows how to use it. Her needs incorporate an enjoyment, a visual enjoyment of the exhibit, so we didn't want to create something where she would be looking at a device the entire time and allow her to experience the exhibit visually. She has interest in unconventional info regarding the artist in exhibit because she has a basic understanding of the art, but she would like to know more in-depth information. And specifically, she wants efficient use of her time because she travels a lot. She does this between her lunch breaks, so she doesn't get to spend too much time in the museum. So we anticipate that she will spend an hour in the museum and maybe get to explore 5 exhibits in depth. So based on that persona, we wanted to create some guidelines for the experience. So the narrative should be audio focused. It should be nonlinear. It should be location aware. So that means the narrative responds to where the user is as opposed to the narrative guiding where the user goes. And it must be portable, so it should be on a handheld device. The content itself needs to be brief, concise, and factual over entertainment. We want to have the narrative, but not in the typical form of a story with rising action, climax, and resolution, but to create the atmosphere instead. And we also want to link the contextual information of the exhibits to allow her to discover exhibits she may not have been that may not have been on her radar to begin with. We thought about narration itself because with the chess program, they had a very specific narrator. But we wanted to focus on the atmosphere, so we were thinking we can have the narration be done through a train station announcement. It creates an atmosphere of cold, harsh, and gray that fits with Beuys' work. And of course, this can be done in variable levels depending on the specific work itself. And in addition to that, we want to create background sounds and just not necessarily music, but just an atmosphere of sounds based on the exhibits themselves. So I'll go into that a little bit further. So talking about the content, more specifically about location aware, when the user travels through the museum, as they approach an exhibit, there will be hotspots, which, for example, are these circles right here. And as you approach them, the ambient noise will become louder and louder. And because you don't want the information to just start talking to you the moment you see the exhibit, you maybe want to take a moment to take it in first, or maybe you even want to skip it and just walk by it. You won't get the audio clips until you select it from the device itself, and that's where the self-curation comes in. She can choose things that are interesting to her and completely skip things that are not. And this could fall under description, the exhibit's impact on art itself, the historic relevance, and so forth. And we wanted to create a system of predictive guidance, which goes back to giving her new exhibits to go see depending on the choices that she's made throughout her visit. So here's a basic context structure. It's very okay. So the exhibit itself, you can kind of think of it as a database of information. And we want to tie an ambient sound to this exhibit that the user experiences right ahead. And they can select the information, and they'll get the audio clip regarding that information. And when they select it, it will create an interest addition to the suggestion engine, which will move different exhibits higher in priority for her to want to visit next. And because we want to create a non-linear experience, the user can go to exhibit 1, exhibit 2. They can skip ones completely altogether, and they're not tied to each other in a way that you have to visit all of them in a certain order or all of them at all. So we created an example path of her visit. So we have her first exhibit she comes across is the infiltration homogen for piano, and it's because it was right there. The museum curated it. They want people to see it first. She doesn't have too much interest in it, so she listens to one audio clip and decides to move on because her time is limited. She comes across the next one. It's something she planned to visit, so she had some knowledge about it beforehand, so she didn't really care about some of the information, and she does a couple and moves along. The next one, it's her favorite exhibit. So she spends a lot of time there. She listens to all the information, even though some of it may be redundant. But because she did that, it created a context anticipation, which allows the device to show her an exhibit that she may be interested in. So she did not plan to see the next exhibit, but because the device suggested it, she decided to go. And she was quite interesting. And by then, her time is running out, and she still has a couple more exhibits that she wants to see, but she can't decide which one. And using the suggestion engine again, she's able to choose the last one and use the most of her time. So we have a content example. It's a lot of text, but basically, we wanted to think of a way of allowing someone who is interested in information to receive it, but also make it short enough where people won't be bogged there for 3 minutes listening to one exhibit if they have no interest in it. So this is a very basic example where each one leads to another, but with more technology and coding, you can create examples, clips that are shorter, but if you want more information, they will expand on it. And last but not least, we want to give them a take-home package. And because each visit is unique to the user, we want to give them a summary of their visit, show them which exhibits they saw and which audio clips they listened to, and maybe even create bullet points for each individual audio clip they listen to. So that way, in the future, when they're maybe on their train back or on the plane, whatever, they can look at these bullet points and they have a point of reference for that material. And we also off-putted the interaction to this portion because we feel like in a museum environment, you're there to take on the exhibits, and if you're there doing your interaction, you'll be missing out on the exhibits themselves. So we have a section that's pre-answered frequently asked questions for factual questions, like when was Beuys born and so forth. And these can be preloaded, and you just go through them and look at them. And we want to allow the user to have an interaction with an expert. So they can type in a more complex question. This question will be searched against previous asked questions, and if a similar one has been answered before, they can look at that question and find their answers. If it's not, if it's a brand new one, it can be added into a queue, and in the future, through email, tweet, or even the program itself, the expert can answer the question for them. And last, we also want to put in a forum for more subjective questions that may not have a real answer, and allow people to discuss it. And of course, this should be moderated by a museum expert, so it doesn't just go somewhere completely else. And finally, our form of gamification is a collection checklist. Since her visit has a summary of what she has done, this can be checked against the database of the collection for the museum. Since you often have exhibits on rotation, this information can be placed in here as well, so she knows when or if the exhibits she was not able to see are available, and she gets to keep track of her museum experience in total. And it also allows the museum to call back the user by saying, oh, we have a exhibit that is relevant to your interest based on the information that we gathered. And that's it. Thank you.